I shouldn't have been in Ethan Harrison's empty architectural firm after midnight, and I definitely shouldn't have been locking the main vault door beside him. The heavy steel latch clicked shut, the sound unnaturally loud, 30 floors above the sleeping, dark city. I could smell the sharp, clean scent of his expensive cologne, something woodsy and precise, mixed with the faint bitterness of stale coffee from hours ago. My hands, still gripping the heavy brass key he'd handed me moments earlier, were trembling slightly, not from the cold, but from the sudden, profound silence. I thought the last part of the night was over, that I could finally grab my bag and rush home before the subway stopped running. But when I finally turned to him, ready to mumble a quick goodbye, he hadn't moved from the threshold of the hallway. He just looked at me, that intense, quiet focus he usually reserved for reviewing blueprints. "Jenna," he whispered, his voice dangerously low and thick. "Don't go yet. Just give me 5 minutes. My life, until about 2 hours ago, was a masterclass in functional predictability. My name is Jenna Reyes, and for the last 4 years, my world has revolved around spreadsheets, deadlines, and the unwavering belief that if you don't expect too much, you won't be disappointed. I was 30 years old, working as an administrative assistant at Harrison & Associates, a towering fortress of glass and steel, where Ethan Harrison, the man who had just asked me to stay, was the formidable architect and owner. More importantly, he was the father of my best friend, Chloe. That fact alone had always placed him firmly in the respectful distance category. I had come back to the office this Tuesday night not for extra pay, but for a simple favor. Chloe, who had flown out for a brief vacation, had accidentally left her spare keys in her dad's office, and he'd called me around 7 p.m. sounding stressed. He was closing a massive deal and needed those keys tonight for a last-minute site inspection the next morning. It was a perfect microcosm of my role in life, the reliable, useful person you call when things fall apart. I picked up the keys, walked the 20 blocks back downtown, and found Ethan still there, buried under stacks of papers, his tie loosened but the intensity in his blue eyes still razor-sharp. My own apartment, a small, meticulously organized space in Queens, waited for me. I had a half-read book, a new episode of a documentary series, and a perfectly portioned leftover chicken salad. That was my Tuesday night, solitude seasoned with competence. It wasn't lonely exactly, it was just quiet. I'd grown used to the hum of the refrigerator being the loudest sound in my life. I was good at my job, I paid my bills on time, and I never caused drama. I was the safe choice, the background character in my own story, and frankly, I had stopped expecting anything to change. I finished helping him retrieve the blueprints from the secure vault because he needed an extra pair of hands to manage the heavy, rolled-up drawings while he reset the security code. It was a brief, mechanical task. We didn't talk about anything personal, just the weight of the steel door, the combination sequence, and the urgency of the deal. I was just Jenna, the efficient young woman who knew where everything was and could keep a secret, the type of person you trust with the keys to the kingdom, but never with the key to your heart. It was a comfortable kind of invisibility. That was the life I was rushing back to when Ethan Harrison suddenly shattered the silence, asking me to give him 5 minutes, as if I had all the time in the world, and as if he hadn't seen right through my functional routine and found something worth stopping. The whole situation had started with the mildest of inconveniences, a misplaced key fob. Chloe had needed it for her rental car at the airport, and instead of leaving it with her dad's assistant, who clocked out promptly at 5, she'd dropped it on the corner of his imposing mahogany desk. I was already home, in my comfortable sweats, calculating whether I had enough energy to make a batch of overnight oats for the morning. Then the text came. Not from Chloe, but from Ethan. "Jenna, sorry to bother you after hours. Big favor. Chloe's key fob is in my office. I need it for the site early tomorrow, and I'm swamped." My first impulse, the practical one, was to say no. The trip back into Manhattan and then back to Queens would easily cost me 2 hours of sleep. But Ethan had always been kind, if distant, and he was the closest thing Chloe had to a reliable parent since her mother moved to the West Coast years ago. More than that, I liked being useful to him. It was a subtle validation that my competence extended beyond filing and scheduling meetings. So I replied simply, "On my way, Mr. Harrison." I didn't rush. The subway ride was mostly empty, and I used the time to read a chapter of my book. When I arrived at the Harrison & Associates building, The lobby was silent. The security guard barely looked up, just nodding me through since I was on the authorized late-night list. There was no thrill, no sense of dramatic destiny unfolding. It was just a Tuesday night errand, fueled by duty and a polite desire to help. The office atmosphere itself was what made the difference. Usually bustling with 100 people, it was now cavernous and still, just the hum of the HVAC system and the distant city sounds filtering through the massive windows. Ethan's private office was an island of light in the darkness, and the interaction, even while I retrieved the key fob, was purely transactional. He was thankful. I was efficient. It was all wrapped up. But then, as I was leaving, he pointed to a blueprint tube. The vault door combination is tricky when you're tired. Mind just waiting while I reset it, Jenna? I need a witness just in case. I didn't mind. I stood there, leaning against the cool marble wall, watching him input the sequence. That was how I ended up holding the vault key, helping him secure the night's work. I was supposed to be walking out, thinking about that chicken salad. Instead, I was staring at the man who had just used my first name. Not Jenna from admin, not Chloe's friend, but just Jenna, and asked me not to leave. It felt less like a choice, and more like gravity had suddenly shifted, pulling me toward him in the absolute darkness of the 31st floor. Ethan Harrison was 52, and the age difference felt less like a gap, and more like an abyss carved out by success and experience. He wasn't just my best friend's father. He was the Ethan Harrison, a name synonymous with half the skyline, a man who moved through rooms with an almost palpable gravitational pull. He didn't have to raise his voice to command attention. His silence was louder than most people's speeches. When I first started working at the firm, he was an untouchable entity, a god in bespoke suits. Now, standing here in the faint glow of the emergency exit signs, he was simply massive. He was tired, though. That was the detail I always noticed. Beneath the perfectly controlled demeanor, there was a tightness around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and the weight of impossible expectations. Most people saw the power. I saw the pressure. His dark hair was threaded with silver at the temples, which only enhanced the severity of his profile. But tonight, a few strands had fallen slightly across his forehead, a sign of rare disarray. He was still wearing his expensive watch, catching the minimal light, but his movements were slow now, drained. This wasn't the man who debated city council members or charmed international investors. This was a man running on fumes, alone in his empire. He was my superior, my employer's employer, and the father of my closest confidant. He was entirely inaccessible, entirely off-limits, and that context made his request, "Don't go yet," feel like a complete breach of the established universe. I remember staring at the floor, counting the patterns in the sleek gray industrial carpet, trying to regulate my breathing. He was leaning against the doorframe, his arms loosely crossed over his chest. He wasn't imposing, but his presence filled the empty space, making the cavernous office feel small. I couldn't look him in the eye without feeling the acute awareness of the taboos separating us. It wasn't just professionalism. It was the sacred boundary around Chloe. Ethan Harrison belonged in the high-stakes, high-status world of deals and millions. I belonged in the quiet efficiency of the administrative pool, sorting out his travel itineraries and making sure his coffee order was correct. He didn't belong in my quiet Tuesday night, and I certainly didn't belong in his post-midnight solitude. But there he was, blurring the lines with a simple, quiet plea for 5 minutes of my time. 5 minutes? I managed to ask, my voice sounding strained and thin in the silence. It wasn't a question of time. I was already going to miss the express train. It was a question of boundaries. I knew I should have just said, "Sorry, I really need to catch the last train," but the words caught in my throat. His intense gaze felt less like the gaze of a boss evaluating performance, and more like the focused attention of someone seeing something for the first time. He didn't move. He simply nodded, pushing off the doorframe slowly. "I know it's late, Jenna. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't necessary." I waited for him to clarify. Was he talking about a critical piece of information I needed to file? Another emergency contact number? But he didn't pull out his phone or point toward a document. He just walked past me, toward the massive panoramic window that overlooked Midtown. The city lights were a glittering tapestry of indifference. "I just needed someone else here for a moment," he finally said, his voice flat, devoid of its usual authority. "It's been a hell of a day." This entire deal, it hinges on things I can't control. I frowned internally. This wasn't professional talk. Ethan Harrison never spoke about lack of control. He was control. I started rationalizing immediately. He was stressed. He was reaching out to the only human being left in the building, and my presence was purely incidental. I was reading too much into a late-night fatigue confession. But then he turned back, and that look solidified my discomfort. His eyes weren't tired. They were troubled, and they weren't skimming over me. They were locking onto me with alarming precision. "Chloe talks about you a lot," he continued, and the shift to the personal felt like a sudden drop in temperature. "She says you're the most grounded person she knows." I felt a rush of heat to my cheeks. "We've been friends for years, Mr. Harrison. She just knows me well." "Ethan," he corrected me immediately, gently but firmly. "Please, it's midnight. We can drop the formalities, can't we?" The use of his first name, at his explicit instruction, at this specific hour, sent a shiver down my spine. It was a minuscule breach, but it opened a fissure in the professional wall I'd spent 4 years building. I felt my perception tilt. Was he just seeking human connection, or was there an undercurrent of something else? Something I, Jenna Reyes, the invisible assistant, was fundamentally misunderstanding. My heart thumped a nervous rhythm against my ribs. I had to stop staring at the way the city lights reflected in his deep blue eyes. This was just fatigue. This was just stress. But the silence stretched, thick and insistent, proving me wrong. I stood there, waiting for him to tell me what 5 minutes meant, what necessary was. I was bracing myself for a corporate crisis, but what came next was utterly different. Ethan walked to his large executive chair, but instead of sitting in it, he leaned his head against the high leather backrest, closing his eyes completely. It was the first time I had ever seen him look small, even weak. The CEO of Harrison and Associates, diminished by exhaustion and something heavier. "I haven't slept properly in 4 days," he admitted, the words barely a rasp. "This deal, it's personal. It was the first major project my father and I disagreed on, right before he passed. If I lose it, I feel like I'm letting him down all over again." The confession was a heavy, unexpected weight dropped between us. This wasn't professional failure. It was ancestral guilt. It was the raw, unedited burden of a man expected to carry an entire legacy on his shoulders. The social asymmetry was still there. He was the magnate. I was the administrative help. But the emotional balance had violently shifted. Suddenly, he was the vulnerable one, and I was the unexpected audience to his genuine human pain. I felt a sharp pang of empathy. I understood pressure. My own pressure was making sure I didn't forget to pay the heating bill. But the core feeling, the fear of failing those you love, was universal. "I'm sorry about your father," I said quietly, automatically moving a few steps closer. It was a purely instinctive movement of comfort. "It sounds like you're carrying too much right now." He opened his eyes and looked at me, really looked at me, and I felt the heat from his focus spread across my skin. "The pressure is immense," he confirmed. "But that's not the worst part. The worst part is that everyone around me only sees the structure, the money, the name. They don't see the risk. They don't see me." He paused, a flicker of something intensely lonely passing across his features. "Except you sometimes. I see you quietly observing in the meetings, Jenna. You notice the moment I stop gripping the pen so tightly. You're the only one who consistently brings me the decaf when I'm past my limit, even when I order the regular." My heart hammered. He saw me, not just functionally, but observationally. The little, careful kindnesses I performed, the ways I tried to smooth the sharp edges of his brutal schedule, he had noticed them all. The invisibility I had relied on to stay safe had been shattered, piece by agonizing piece, by the one man who had the power to make my life utterly complicated. He straightened up and gestured vaguely toward the corner of the room, where a small, expensive coffee machine sat, usually ignored after lunch. "I'm going to make some fresh tea. Chamomile. Would you care for a cup?" It was a ridiculous question at 12:15 a.m., but it was also a concrete invitation to remain in this strange, shared space. "Yes, Ethan. Thank you," I replied, using his first name again, feeling the word settle awkwardly on my tongue, but also feeling a strange rightness about it. He moved slowly, deliberately. The preparation of the tea became a ritual in the dead silence. We stood side by side in the small kitchenette area of his office, the gentle burble of the water heater the only sound besides our breathing. I watched the way his large, competent hands handled the delicate porcelain mugs, hands that designed skyscrapers, now focused on steeping tea leaves. We didn't discuss the architecture deal again. We talked about Chloe, briefly, how she was enjoying her trip, how she was too quick to dismiss her own talent. Then the conversation drifted naturally to small things. The unseasonably warm weather, the new restaurant that had opened near the office, how much we both disliked the relentless noise of the city. These were mundane topics, the kind of things you talk about with a coworker you genuinely respect, but under the cover of midnight and the profound intimacy of his earlier confession, they felt weighted. Every shared silence was comfortable, every nod of agreement a confirmation that we spoke the same language of quiet observation. He handed me the mug. Our fingers brushed for the briefest moment, and the heat transfer, from the porcelain, from his skin, was immediate and potent. I quickly gripped the cup with both hands, using the warmth as an anchor. "It's good to talk to someone who isn't trying to sell me something," he said, taking a slow sip of his tea, his eyes closed in momentary relief. "Or tell me what I should do next." "I don't have advice for you, Ethan," I murmured, staring into the swirling liquid, just listening. He looked up then, and a genuine, unburdened smile touched his mouth, transforming his exhausted features. It wasn't the practiced smile he gave to clients. It was honest, slightly shy, and it reached his eyes. Listening is a lot, Jenna, more than most people offer these days. In that moment, standing in the cold, dark office, with the scent of chamomile hanging in the air, the age difference, the hierarchy, and the relationship with Chloe, all faded into the background noise. There was just two people, sharing warmth and honesty, suspended in a reality that felt truer than the one waiting outside the building. No promises were exchanged, no grand declarations made, just a powerful, undeniable connection that left a warm, aching hollow in my chest. The tea finished too quickly, and with the last sip, the reality of the situation came crashing back down. I set the empty mug down on his coaster, the porcelain making a small, sharp sound that signaled the end of our brief truce with the world. Chloe. Her face flashed in my mind. She was my friend, my sister in everything but blood. She adored her father, looked up to him, relied on him. The sheer betrayal I would feel if I ever crossed that line was debilitating. And it wasn't just Chloe. It was my job, my reputation, the steady, predictable existence I had meticulously built. I looked at Ethan, who was watching me with an expression that was too knowing, too patient. He looked ready to wait forever. "I really do need to go, Ethan," I said, stepping back slightly, the movement an instinctive physical barrier. My voice was firmer now, reinforced by fear. "I've missed the last good train, and I have an early start tomorrow." I saw the disappointment flicker in his eyes, brief but profound, like a light switching off. He didn't argue. He didn't pressure me. He just accepted my declaration of the boundary, and that acceptance, paradoxically, made me feel worse. It made the choice entirely mine, placing all the moral weight on my shoulders. "Of course," he murmured, his voice returning to the low, controlled cadence of the CEO. "Thank you for coming in, Jenna, and for the 5 minutes." I reached for my tote bag near the desk. Every muscle in my body was screaming at me to walk quickly toward the elevator, to escape the electric tension that still vibrated in the air around him. What was I risking? Everything. A job I needed, a friendship I cherished, and the quiet dignity of my life. People like Ethan Harrison didn't have casual affairs with their administrative staff, and if they did, the staff member always paid the price. I didn't want to be a footnote in his complicated life, a secret he forgot. I needed to leave before I let the unexpected vulnerability he showed fool me into thinking we operated on the same plane. I was halfway to the door, my hand already reaching for the brass handle, when the thought struck me. I was actively running away from the one moment in my adult life where I felt truly seen. I was sacrificing the possibility of genuine connection for the sake of sterile correctness. The fear of what I might lose battled fiercely with the sudden, undeniable knowledge of what I desperately wanted to keep, the warmth of his attention, the weight of his shared burden. It was an agonizing internal conflict, one that threatened to split me in two. I knew I needed to maintain the distance, but my feet had slowed to a reluctant crawl. I was standing by the door, my back turned to him, clutching the strap of my bag so tightly my knuckles were white. I just needed to open the door, walk through the empty corridor, and press the elevator button. Safety was one motion away, but I couldn't move. My feet were cemented to the polished floor, waiting for the inevitable, quiet goodbye that would return us to our respective separate realities. Instead, Ethan's voice cut through the silence. It wasn't the tired rasp from before, nor the controlled cadence of the CEO. It was rough, honest, and stripped bare of all pretense. "Jenna, wait." I paused, but didn't turn around. My heart was pounding so loudly I was convinced he could hear it from across the room. "You're right. You need to leave," he conceded. "But before you do, you need to understand something. This isn't about me being tired or stressed or lonely. Not entirely." He took 2 slow steps toward me, closing the distance just enough so I could feel the residual warmth radiating from him. He stopped directly behind me, close enough that I could no longer breathe without drawing in the faint scent of his cologne. "For 4 years," he said, and the intensity in his voice was staggering, "I have watched you make yourself invisible. You walk through this office like a ghost, efficient and kind, never asking for anything. You don't realize how hard that is to do, to be that contained, that responsible all the time." I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to hold back the sudden rush of unexpected emotion. I wasn't trying to be invisible. I was trying to be safe. He continued, his voice dropping lower, a confession meant only for my ears. "But I see you, Jenna. I have seen you for a long time. I noticed the way you organize your desk before you leave, the way you always check on the junior staff, the way you pause by the window at sunset, just for a second, like you're taking a deep breath before facing the world again." He didn't touch me, but his words were the most physical contact I had ever felt. "I see the goodness you try to hide. I see the capacity for quiet passion in your eyes when you think no one is looking. And I keep thinking," his voice cracked slightly on the last word, "that you are wasting all that genuine life being the person everyone expects you to be." He hesitated, then delivered the final devastating sentence, the one that broke through all my defenses. "I want you to stop running. I want you to look at me and tell me I'm wrong, that for 4 years I have been hoping you would accidentally miss the last train, just so I could have 5 minutes with the real you." The sound of my own sharply inhaled breath was the only response I could offer for a long moment. His words, delivered with such naked honesty, had bypassed my rational mind entirely and struck directly at the core of my buried desires. He sees me. The man who could have any woman, any kind of life, had chosen to spend 4 years simply observing the quiet, invisible parts of me. I slowly turned around, dropping my heavy tote bag to the floor with a soft thud. I was facing him now, less than a foot separating us. His blue eyes, usually shielded by an armor of professionalism, were wide with a nervous intensity that matched my own. He wasn't demanding anything. He was offering a difficult, terrifying choice. "I am terrified, Ethan," I whispered, the admission tasting like ash on my tongue. "Of all the rules I would break, all the things I would lose if I admit that I'm not misinterpreting this moment, that I feel it too." My hands felt clammy, and I finally let go of the keys, letting them clatter softly onto his desk. "You are my boss. You are Chloe's father. We are not supposed to be standing here after midnight, talking about how we see each other." He nodded gravely, accepting every point of the moral dilemma. He didn't try to diminish the consequences. "You don't have to choose the easy path, Jenna," he countered, his voice steadying. "You just have to choose the true one. If you walk out that door right now, I will respect it. I will go back to being your difficult employer. But I will know that you ran, because you were afraid of being seen, not because you wanted to go. The challenge was brutal. It forced me to confront the pattern of my life, always choosing safety, always choosing to be the background character. But what was the point of being safe if I felt this empty, this unseen, most of the time?" I took a shaky breath, feeling the fear give way to a startling surge of courage. It wasn't bravado. It was just plain honesty. "You're right. I don't want to go," I confessed, my voice stronger now. "I don't know what this is. I don't know what it means for tomorrow or Chloe or my job, but I cannot walk out and pretend that you didn't just say that to me, or that I didn't just feel every word." I wasn't promising a relationship. I was just promising to stop running. I looked up at him, meeting his gaze directly. Tell me what we do now, Ethan." He didn't move to kiss me or to take my hand or make any grand, definitive gesture. Instead, a genuine, profound sense of relief washed over his face, softening the harsh lines of exhaustion. He simply reached out and very gently picked up my abandoned tote bag. "We start by finding you a cab that doesn't charge extortionate late-night rates," he said, the practicality grounding the sudden emotional chaos. "And then, we talk, away from the silence of this office, away from the pressure of the firm." He led the way out of his office, through the massive, dark space. We didn't speak again as we waited for the elevator, but the silence now was different, no longer heavy with avoidance, but light with shared potential. My internal conflict hadn't vanished. It was simply paused, eclipsed by the intoxicating realization that I had dared to choose my own truth over my predetermined routine. The elevator descent felt impossibly long. I was acutely aware of his presence beside me, his shoulder occasionally brushing mine as the box swayed slightly. 30 floors of unspoken history and fear descended into the quiet lobby. The security guard merely nodded, accustomed to late-night departures, completely unaware of the seismic shift that had just occurred above his head. When we stepped out onto the quiet street, the air was cool and crisp. Ethan flagged a yellow taxi immediately. As the cab pulled up, he opened the door for me, his expression serious. "I won't pretend this is simple, Jenna," he said, leaning down so his voice was low, intimate, shielded by the city noise. "I won't pretend that what we have isn't complicated by every single rule we both know we should follow. But I don't want to go back to ignoring you." I looked at him, at the silver threads in his hair catching the streetlight, at the honesty in his eyes. I wasn't just getting into a cab. I was crossing a threshold I could never uncross. "Neither do I, Ethan," I admitted, stepping into the back seat. He closed the door, his hand lingering for a moment on the glass. Then he tapped the window, signaling the driver. But before the cab pulled away, he leaned down one last time, meeting my gaze through the glass. "I'll text you when I know when I can see you again, outside of work, just you and me." And just like that, I was moving, physically moving away from the office, but emotionally moving towards something utterly unknown, terrifying, and profoundly real. The cityscape blurred as the taxi sped up, leaving the illuminated skyscraper behind. My life was no longer functional and predictable. It was suddenly dangerous and alive. I closed my eyes, allowing myself one private, nervous smile. The game had changed, and for the first time in years, I was excited to play. Did Jenna make the right choice, risking her job and her best friend for the quiet attention of the man who sees her? The true risk isn't in what she loses, but what she gains. Hit the like button if you think some rules are worth breaking, and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of this complicated and unexpected story.